The morning sun climbed slowly over the Wyoming hills, painting the Carson ranch in hues of amber and gold. Emily Carson, a 48-year-old rancher's wife, moved through the dew-soaked fields with quiet determination. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and the faint musk of cattle, but Emily's mind was elsewhere. As her boots pressed faint impressions into the soft ground, her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. She paused at the fence line, her practiced hands working deftly to repair a loose wire. Her every movement was deliberate, the efficiency of someone who knew her land intimately. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a hard-working woman, content with the rhythms of rural life. But there was an edge to her gaze, a depth of awareness that hinted at something more. Near the edge of the property, a glint of light caught her attention. Emily stilled, her grip tightening on the pliers in her hand. The light reflected off chrome, the unmistakable flash of a motorcycle passing slowly along the dirt road just beyond her fence. It was the fourth time this week. Different riders, but the same insignia, a skull wrapped in the gears of a roaring engine, emblazoned on their leather vests. The Steel Reapers. Emily's expression didn't change as the motorcycle rolled out of sight, but her jaw tightened. They were getting bolder, no longer content to watch from a distance. For weeks, the gang had been pressuring ranchers in the area to sell their land. Those who resisted faced vandalism, arson, and threats. Some had given in, too scared or too weary to fight. Emily wasn't like them. Back at the ranch house, Jack Carsons sat at the kitchen table, his large, calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. He was a quiet man, his face weathered by years under the Wyoming sun, his silver hair cropped short. A newspaper lay open in front of him, but his eyes were distant. He looked up as Emily walked in, brushing dirt off her jeans. "They're back," he said simply, his voice heavy with resignation. Emily poured herself a cup of coffee and joined him at the table. "How many?" "Just one this time." "Red bike." Amateur rider, kept his weight too far forward. Jack shook his head. "They're watching, Emily. Waiting for something." "They're not just watching anymore," Emily replied, her tone steady. "They're building patterns. Testing us." Jack sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "We could sell," he said reluctantly. "They're offering more than the place is worth. Maybe it's time we let it go." Emily set her cup down with a deliberate motion. Her gaze met his, calm but unyielding. "It's not about the money, Jack. This ranch isn't just land to them. It's control. If they get this place, they own the entire route to the highway. They'll use it for something big." Before Jack could respond, the distant rumble of engines reached their ears. It grew louder, the vibrations almost palpable in the stillness of the morning. Jack stiffened, his hand instinctively tightening around the handle of his coffee mug. Emily stood and moved to the window, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. 3 motorcycles appeared at the crest of the driveway, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached. "Stay inside," she said firmly, not looking back at Jack. "Emily, wait." "Promise me," she interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. After a tense moment, Jack nodded. "I promise." Emily stepped onto the porch as the bikers came to a stop in a loose formation. The lead rider, a tall man with a wolfish grin, removed his helmet. His slicked-back hair gleamed in the sunlight, and his leather jacket bore the Steel Reaper's insignia. His companions, younger and harder-looking, dismounted and stood on either side of him, their hands resting casually on their belts. "Mrs. Carson," the leader called out, his tone as smooth as the expensive shades he pulled off his face. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Emily crossed her arms, her expression neutral. "This is private property. State your business." The man chuckled, his grin widening. "Now, don't be like that. I'm Jackson Creed. My organization is looking to expand in this area. Your property happens to be in a very strategic location. My boss is willing to pay handsomely for it." "We're not interested," Emily said evenly. Jackson tilted his head, his smile tightening. "That's unfortunate. Progress is coming, Mrs. Carson. Smart folks adapt. Others," he shrugged, his tone turning icy. "Sometimes accidents happen." Emily allowed a flicker of unease to cross her face. It was calculated, a crack in the armor she wanted them to see. "I'll talk to my husband," she said softly. Jackson reached into his jacket, pulling out a business card. He held it out to her with an air of smug confidence. "Take some time to think it over. We'll be back." The roar of engines filled the air as the bikers sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Emily remained on the porch until the sound faded, her eyes narrowed. She turned and stepped back into the house, her calm demeanor shifting as the door closed behind her. "They'll come back," she said to Jack, her voice low and certain. Jack stood, his concern etched deeply in his face. "What are we going to do?" Emily's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "We prepare." That night, as the ranch house settled into silence, Emily moved with purpose. In the barn, she pried open a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. From its depths, she retrieved a weathered lockbox. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over its contents. A sleek, well-maintained pistol, a badge bearing the name Sarah Monroe, and a file filled with photographs and notes. Her eyes lingered on the badge, a relic of a past she had buried a decade ago. The Steel Reapers thought they were predators, moving unchallenged through Wyoming's vast expanse. They didn't realize they had awakened something far more dangerous. As the stars filled the Wyoming sky, Emily Carson, the rancher's wife, began to plan. The Wyoming morning gave way to a crisp afternoon, the air filled with the low hum of crickets and the occasional distant call of a hawk. Emily Carson stood on the porch of her ranch house, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Jack had gone into town for supplies, but Emily had chosen to stay behind. The weight of the previous day's events still lingered, like a storm brewing just beyond the hills. Inside, she sat at the dining table, a weathered file spread open before her. The photos inside told stories she tried to forget: black and white surveillance images of shadowy figures, grainy shots of weapons shipments, and detailed profiles of men who had once been untouchable. She flipped through the documents methodically, her mind slipping into a rhythm she hadn't allowed herself in years. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. Emily glanced at the screen. The number was unlisted, but she recognized it immediately. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "Sarah," came the reply, the voice deep and gravelly. She hadn't heard her real name spoken in years. For a moment, the memories threatened to overwhelm her. "What do you have for me?" she asked, regaining her composure. Marcus Lane chuckled softly on the other end of the line. "Straight to business. You haven't changed." "Time hasn't made me sentimental," Emily replied. "I'm guessing you've got a Steel Reapers problem," Marcus said, the humor fading from his tone. "They've been stirring up trouble all over the region, but it's not just ranches they're after." Emily leaned forward. "What are they after, Marcus?" "A pipeline," he said. "Not oil, something worse. They're moving weapons. Big shipments. Stuff that shouldn't even be in this country. The Reapers are just the muscle. The brains are elsewhere." Emily frowned, her mind racing. "How far does it go?" Marcus hesitated. "Far enough that you should think twice about getting involved. The guy pulling the strings calls himself the broker. Nobody's ever seen him, but his name shows up every time something goes sideways. Arms deals, disappearances, entire towns being bought out. The Reapers are just one of his tools." Emily's fingers brushed over the badge in front of her. She knew what Marcus wasn't saying. She was no longer a federal agent. She had no backup, no legal authority, and no safety net. But the quiet rage building inside her told her she didn't need any of those things. "Send me what you have," she said. "Sarah," "Emily," Marcus corrected himself. "You don't have to do this. You've already given enough." "Just send it," she said firmly. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, Marcus sighed. "You'll have it in an hour. Be careful." Emily hung up without responding. She closed the file in front of her and locked it away before stepping outside. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of pine and the faint tang of smoke. Somewhere, far off, the Steel Reapers were planning their next move. Later that evening, as the Wyoming sky turned a deep shade of violet, Emily's computer pinged. The file from Marcus had arrived. She opened it with the same precision she had once brought to federal briefings, scanning the contents quickly. The Steel Reapers were involved in more than intimidation and land grabs. They were a distribution network for a sophisticated arms operation, smuggling high-grade weapons across state lines. The operation had ties to international buyers, with shipments moving through backwater routes to avoid detection. One document caught her eye, a photo of a heavily secured compound in the mountains, identified as a Steel Reaper's base. It wasn't just a clubhouse. It was a hub for storing and distributing their cargo. Emily leaned back in her chair, the pieces clicking into place. The Reapers weren't acting on their own. They were small cogs in a much larger machine. Her mind drifted back to a decade earlier, to a life she tried to leave behind. Sarah Monroe had been one of the most effective agents in the Justice Department's Organized Crime Division. Her specialty was dismantling networks from the inside, infiltrating deep and leaving no trace of her presence until it was too late for her targets. Her name had become a whispered legend among criminals, the Ghost. She could move undetected through layers of security, gathering intel and executing operations with precision. But her career ended in Betrayal. The Elgin cartel had been her biggest case, a sprawling operation trafficking weapons and drugs across the southern border. Sarah had spent 2 years embedded, gathering evidence and coordinating with international agencies. She'd been on the verge of bringing the entire operation down when her own agency pulled the plug. They claimed national security concerns. Sarah had suspected corruption, but she couldn't prove it. Disillusioned, she left the life behind, retreating to Wyoming under the name Emily Carson. The badge, now tarnished and worn, was all that remained of her past. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled Emily back to the present. She rose from her desk and moved to the window. Jack's truck was pulling into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the twilight. She met him on the porch as he climbed out, a sack of groceries in one arm. "You were gone a while," she said. Jack set the groceries down and gave her a weary smile. "Ran into Sheriff Nolan. He asked if we'd had any trouble with the Reapers." "What did you tell him?" Jack hesitated. "I told him the truth, that they've been watching the property." Emily nodded, her expression unreadable. "He said to be careful," Jack continued. "Promised to send a patrol car out this way more often." "That won't help," Emily said softly. Jack's brow furrowed. "Why not?" Emily's eyes darkened. "Because the Reapers aren't the real threat." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" Emily placed a hand on his arm. "I just need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Jack sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I trust you, Emily. Always have." That night, as the ranch house settled into silence, Emily prepared for what was to come. She packed a small bag with essentials, a burner phone, spare ammunition, and a GPS tracker. Her pistol, once locked away in the barn, now rested in its holster at her side. She drove out to an overlook that gave her a clear view of the highway below. There, under the cover of darkness, she set up a small surveillance drone, its sleek body equipped with high-resolution cameras. As the drone lifted into the night sky, Emily watched the monitor in her truck. The Steel Reapers had made their first mistake, targeting her ranch. The second mistake would be thinking she was just another rancher's wife. Sarah Monroe, the Ghost, was back. The Steel Reapers' compound loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of corrugated steel and chain-link fencing tucked into the shadow of the Wyoming mountains. Emily Carson, now fully embracing her former identity as Sarah Monroe, watched from a ridge overlooking the site. The drone she had deployed the night before had done its job, mapping out guard rotations, vehicle patterns, and entry points. The compound bustled with activity. Men unloading crates from trucks, motorcycles roaring in and out, and spotlights sweeping across the perimeter. It was a hive of organized chaos, every movement pointing to something larger than the Steel Reapers alone. Emily's heart raced, not with fear, but with the thrill of returning to what she had trained for. Her mind calculated risks, analyzed patterns, and weighed outcomes. The Ghost was hunting again. Earlier that day, Emily had staged her entry into the Reaper's world. She drove her old pickup truck to a roadside bar frequented by the gang. The bar, a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof, was a known hangout for Steel Reapers. Inside, the air reeked of stale beer, sweat, and cigarette smoke. The bartender, a burly man with tattoos covering his arms, looked up as she entered. His expression shifted from indifference to mild curiosity. Emily's appearance, a middle-aged woman in work jeans and a flannel shirt, didn't match the usual clientele. Ignoring the stares, she approached the bar and ordered a whiskey. As she sipped the drink, she let her eyes wander, subtly observing the room. The Reapers occupied a corner booth, their loud voices and laughter dominating the space. She didn't have to wait long. One of them noticed her, a wiry man with a shaved head and a leering grin. He elbowed his companion and sauntered over. "Hey there, sweetheart," he drawled, leaning against the bar. "Haven't seen you around here before." Emily feigned nervousness, her hands gripping the whiskey glass tightly. "I'm not from around here. Just passing through." The man's grin widened. "Passing through? Huh? You sure don't look like the type to be traveling alone." Emily glanced away, pretending to hesitate. I've had some trouble. With my husband." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I needed to get away for a bit." The man's eyes lit up with interest. "That's so? Well, maybe you found the right place to lay low." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We take care of our own, you know?" Another Reaper called out from the booth. "Come on, Vance. Quit hogging the pretty lady." Vance chuckled and turned back to Emily. "Why don't you come meet the boys? They'll love you." Emily hesitated, her expression conflicted, then nodded. She allowed herself to be led to the booth, where the other gang members greeted her with crude jokes and flirtatious remarks. Over the next hour, Emily played her role perfectly. She laughed at their jokes, feigned interest in their stories, and subtly steered the conversation toward the compound. She learned about their routines, their leader Jackson Creed's temper, and the shipments they were guarding. As the night wore on, Vance grew more possessive, keeping her close and offering to take her to the compound. Emily accepted, knowing this was her way in. Now, standing on the ridge overlooking the compound, Emily reflected on how easily the plan had come together. She adjusted the scarf covering her face, concealing her identity from the gang members below. Vance had vouched for her at the gate, introducing her as someone who could be useful. The guards had been skeptical but waved her in after a cursory inspection. Inside, the compound was a maze of storage units, trailers, and makeshift garages. Men moved with purpose, carrying crates and loading vehicles. Emily made mental notes of their equipment: AK-47s, sniper rifles, and crates marked with Cyrillic letters. Vance led her to a central trailer where Jackson Creed held court. The gang leader sat at a table surrounded by his top men, a map of the region spread before them. Emily kept her posture submissive, her eyes downcast as Vance introduced her. "This is Annie," Vance said, using the name Emily had given him. "She's had some trouble at home. Figured she might be able to help us out." Jackson's piercing gaze raked over her, assessing. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a quiet menace. "You think you can be useful, Annie?" Emily nodded, keeping her tone soft. "I'll do whatever you need." Jackson's lips curled into a half-smile. "Good. We'll see about that." Over the next few days, Emily worked to integrate herself into the compound's routine. She helped with menial tasks, kept a low profile, and listened. The Reapers were sloppy in their confidence, discussing shipments and schedules openly. One night, as she helped unload a truck, Emily noticed Ryan Briggs, the gang's second-in-command, watching her. He was different from the others, reserved, with a military bearing and a sharp intelligence in his eyes. Later, as the compound quieted, Ryan approached her. "You don't belong here," he said bluntly. Emily froze, keeping her expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean." Ryan leaned against a stack of crates, studying her. "You're too calm, too deliberate. I've seen people like you before. Ex-military? Law enforcement?" Emily's heart raced, but she forced a laugh. "You're giving me too much credit. I'm just trying to stay out of trouble." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Trouble's exactly what you're in, and if you're not careful, it'll find you fast." He walked away, leaving Emily with the unsettling sense that he knew more than he was letting on. The next evening, Emily found the opportunity she'd been waiting for. The compound's guards were distracted, focused on unloading a particularly large shipment. She slipped into the central trailer, where Jackson Creed's maps and documents were stored. Moving quickly, she photographed everything: routes, contact lists, and manifests. Each piece of information confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The Reapers were just one cog in a global arms operation. But one name stood out among the documents: the broker. Emily felt a chill as she read the details. The broker wasn't just supplying weapons. He was orchestrating conflicts, fueling chaos for profit. Before she could leave, the trailer door creaked open. Ryan Briggs stood in the doorway, his expression hard. "You've got about 30 seconds to tell me who you really are," he said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Emily straightened, her mind racing. Then, she made a choice. "I'm not your enemy," she said, "but Jackson is. And so is the broker." Ryan's jaw tightened. "What do you know about the broker?" "More than you," Emily said. "And if you want out of this alive, you'll listen." Ryan hesitated, torn between loyalty and doubt. Finally, he stepped aside, motioning for her to follow. "You'd better have a damn good plan," he said. Emily allowed herself a small, determined smile. "I always do." Together, they disappeared into the shadows, the first crack forming in the Steel Reaper's empire. The cold Wyoming night settled over the Steel Reaper's compound like a suffocating blanket. Inside an abandoned barn on the edge of the property, Emily Carson, formerly Agent Sarah Monroe, and Ryan Briggs, the Steel Reaper's second-in-command, sat facing each other. Between them was a makeshift table, illuminated by a single flashlight. Maps, photos, and manifests from Jackson Creed's trailer were spread out before them. Ryan's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. "You're asking me to betray everything I've built here," he said, his voice low and tense. "I'm asking you to make a choice," Emily countered. "Stay loyal to a man who's using you and your crew as cannon fodder, or help me stop something that's bigger than all of us." Ryan ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. "You talk like you know what's really going on, but all I see is a pile of stolen documents." Emily slid a photograph across the table. It showed Jackson Creed shaking hands with a man in a tailored suit. "That's Carter Voss," she said. "You might know him as the broker." Ryan stared at the image, his brow furrowing. "I've heard the name. Jackson always acts like he's the one calling the shots, but he takes a lot of calls late at night. Thought it was just suppliers." "Voss isn't a supplier," Emily said. "He's the architect of this whole operation. The Steel Reapers are just a delivery service. You've been running weapons, not for survival, but to fuel conflicts across the globe." Ryan's hands curled into fists. "What kind of conflicts?" "The kind that pay men like Voss millions," Emily replied. "Wars, coups, revolutions, he doesn't care about the outcome. All he cares about is profit." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Ryan broke it. "If what you're saying is true, Jackson's got more than just us on the hook." "He does," Emily confirmed, tapping a map with red lines marking key routes. "These shipments are part of a much larger network. Voss has connections to corrupt officials, private military contractors, and foreign buyers. He's using the Reapers because no one looks twice at a biker gang running guns through backroads." Ryan stared at the map for a long moment. "If I help you, what's the plan?" Emily leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. "We expose Voss. But first, we dismantle the Steel Reaper's role in this operation. That means stopping the next shipment." The next morning, Emily and Ryan put their plan into motion. Ryan, still maintaining his cover within the gang, returned to the compound to gather intel on the next shipment. Emily, meanwhile, worked from a hidden vantage point near the property, using the surveillance drone to track movements and document activities. Hours later, Ryan returned to the barn, his expression grim. "The shipment leaves tomorrow night. They're running it through Canyon Ridge, avoiding the main roads." Emily nodded, her mind already calculating the best approach. "What's the cargo?" Ryan hesitated. "Military-grade rifles and anti-tank weapons. Jackson's been real cagey about where it's going, but I heard him mention someone named Gregorov." Emily's blood ran cold. "Gregorov is a known arms dealer. If he's involved, this shipment isn't staying in the U.S. It's headed overseas." "That's not all," Ryan added. "Jackson's bringing in extra muscle. Mercenaries. Not like the usual guys. Voss's influence, Emily said. He's not taking any chances with this one. Ryan folded his arms. So how do we stop it? They've got the numbers, and they've got the firepower. Emily allowed herself a small smile. We don't fight them head-on. We make them think they're under attack from all sides. That night, Emily and Ryan worked tirelessly to set their trap. Using the intel they'd gathered, they planned a multi-pronged ambush designed to disrupt the shipment and sow chaos among the Steel Reapers. The plan hinged on precision and deception. Emily's drone would track the convoy's movements while Ryan coordinated a series of distractions inside the compound. Meanwhile, Marcus Lane, Emily's old ally, would ensure law enforcement was ready to intercept once the convoy reached the highway. We only get one shot at this, Emily said as she loaded her pistol. If Jackson or Voss realizes what we're doing, they'll shut it all down. Ryan nodded, checking his rifle. No pressure then. The convoy departed just after sunset, a line of 4 heavily loaded trucks escorted by a dozen armed bikers. Emily tracked them from her vantage point, her drone feeding live footage to a tablet in her hands. Convoy's moving, she said into her comms. First distraction, go. Inside the compound, Ryan lit a series of small fires near the storage units, triggering the alarms. As the guards scrambled to respond, he slipped away and destroyed several fuel reserves, crippling their ability to pursue the convoy if things went south. Distractions are working, Ryan reported. They're chasing shadows. Good, Emily replied. Stay on them. I'm moving to intercept. Emily's ambush site was a narrow pass along Canyon Ridge, where the trucks would be forced to slow down. She had spent the day planting spike strips and remote detonated flashbangs at key points along the route. As the convoy entered the pass, Emily triggered the first set of devices. The lead truck skidded to a halt as its tires blew out, causing the rest of the convoy to grind to a stop. Who the hell planned this route? One of the bikers shouted, leaping off his motorcycle. Emily watched from her hidden position, her pulse steady. The bikers dismounted, scanning the area for threats. One of them moved toward the nearest ridge, his rifle raised. She waited until he was in position, then took him down with a single, silenced shot. Chaos erupted as the bikers realized they were under attack. Emily moved swiftly, using the terrain to her advantage. Her shots were precise, disabling vehicles and disarming opponents without unnecessary bloodshed. Convoys stopped, she reported into her comms. Call it in. Marcus's voice crackled over the line. Highway patrol is en route. ETA 3 minutes. Emily moved toward the trucks, her pistol drawn. As she secured the cargo, she found Ryan waiting near the last vehicle, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. You actually pulled it off, he said. We're not done yet, Emily replied. Help me rig the explosives. We're making sure this shipment never moves again. Together, they planted charges on the crates of weapons, retreating just as the first police sirens echoed through the canyon. The explosion lit up the night sky, a fiery reminder of the Steel Reaper's defeat. As Emily and Ryan slipped away, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The shipment was destroyed, the convoy disrupted, and the Reapers dealt a critical blow. But Emily knew the battle was far from over. Voss would retaliate, and when he did, she would be ready. The ghost had returned, and the hunt was only just beginning. The fire from the destroyed shipment still glowed faintly in the distance as Emily Carson and Ryan Briggs drove away from Canyon Ridge. Emily gripped the wheel tightly, her mind racing. The operation had been a success, but it was only a matter of time before Jackson Creed and his benefactor, Carter Voss, struck back. Beside her, Ryan stared out the window, his jaw clenched. You know what this means, right? Jackson's not just going to roll over. He'll come for me first. Emily glanced at him, her voice calm but firm. He'll come for both of us. That's why we need to move fast. Fast. Ryan turned to her, incredulous. We just blew up millions of dollars worth of weapons. Do you have any idea how bad the fallout's going to be? Emily didn't flinch. I do. And that's why we need to take the fight to them before they regroup. We hit them where it hurts, directly at Voss's network. Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're insane. You know that, right? Emily's lips twitched into the faintest smile. I've been called worse. Back at the barn, Emily laid out the next steps. The raid on the convoy had unearthed critical intel, shipping manifests, encrypted communications, and a partial list of Voss's contacts. It was enough to begin dismantling his network, but only if they acted quickly. Ryan leaned against a crate, his arms crossed. You've got files, maps, and a bunch of names. How does that help us when Voss has an army of mercenaries and more resources than we can imagine? It helps because Voss is overconfident, Emily replied. He's built his empire on secrecy, and he assumes no one can touch him. We're going to prove him wrong. Ryan studied her, his skepticism gradually giving way to grudging respect. What's the play? Emily pointed to a red circle on the map she had spread out before them. This is one of Voss's key depots. It's smaller than the compound, but just as critical. If we hit it, we cripple his supply chain and force him to react. Ryan frowned. And when he reacts, what then? Emily's expression hardened. We follow the trail to him. This ends with Voss. Meanwhile, in a luxury penthouse far from the chaos of Wyoming, Carter Voss reviewed the reports on his tablet. His sharp features were illuminated by the glow of the screen, his piercing blue eyes scanning the details with surgical precision. Jackson Creed stood across from him, shifting uncomfortably under Voss's icy gaze. They destroyed the shipment, Voss said, his tone calm but menacing. Jackson nodded, his usual bravado gone. We didn't see it coming. Whoever this woman is, she's good. She's got Ryan working with her too. Voss set the tablet down and folded his hands. Ryan Briggs. I expected more from him. He's a traitor, Jackson growled. I'll handle him personally. Voss tilted his head, his expression unreadable. No, you won't. Ryan is small time. The woman is the real threat. Find out who she is and bring her to me. Alive. What about the depot? Jackson asked. Voss's gaze turned cold. We defend it, and we send a message. 2 days later, Emily and Ryan prepared to raid the depot. It was located on the outskirts of a remote town, hidden in plain sight behind the facade of a trucking company. Using a combination of surveillance and Ryan's insider knowledge, they identified weak points in the security. The depot was heavily guarded, with patrols rotating every 10 minutes and cameras covering most of the perimeter. We can't take them all head-on, Ryan said, crouching beside Emily as they reviewed the layout. We won't have to, Emily replied. We'll draw their attention away from the depot itself, hit their communications hub first, and then take out their power. They'll be blind and scrambling. Ryan smirked. You make it sound easy. It's not, Emily said, but it's the only way. That night, under the cover of darkness, Emily and Ryan moved into position. The depot was eerily quiet, its floodlights casting long shadows over the trucks and storage units. Emily approached the communications hub, a small trailer near the edge of the property, while Ryan took position near the power station. Through her earpiece, Emily whispered, "In position. Wait for my signal." Ryan's voice crackled back, "Ready when you are." Emily disabled the lock on the trailer with practiced ease and slipped inside. The interior was cramped, filled with monitors and radios. She quickly planted a signal jammer and downloaded the depot's logs onto a flash drive. "Done," she said softly. "Lights out." A moment later, the compound was plunged into darkness. The guards reacted immediately, shouting orders and fumbling with flashlights. Emily and Ryan moved through the confusion like shadows, taking down guards silently and avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Inside the depot's main storage area, they found rows of crates marked with international shipping codes. Emily scanned the labels, her stomach sinking as she realized what they were dealing with. "This isn't just weapons," she said. "There's smuggling classified tech, drone components, encryption servers. This goes deeper than I thought." Ryan stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "How deep?" "Deep enough to involve people far above Voss," Emily said grimly. Before they could leave, the sound of engines roared in the distance. Through the darkness, headlights pierced the night, illuminating the depot's gates. "They're here," Ryan said, his voice tight. Voss's mercenaries moved with military precision, dismounting from their vehicles and sweeping the area with weapons raised. Emily and Ryan ducked behind a stack of crates, their hearts pounding. "We can't fight them all," Ryan whispered. "We're not here to fight," Emily replied. "We're here to send a message." She pulled a detonator from her pocket and pressed the button. Explosions erupted across the depot as the charges they had planted earlier ignited. The mercenaries scrambled, shouting orders and firing blindly into the darkness. Amid the chaos, Emily and Ryan slipped away, disappearing into the night. Back at their safe house, Emily reviewed the data they had retrieved from the depot. Every file painted a clearer picture of Voss's operation, but it also revealed something more troubling. "There's a list," she said, her voice heavy. "A list of what?" Ryan asked. "Targets," Emily replied. "Politicians, journalists, even federal agents. Voss isn't just moving weapons. He's silencing anyone who could expose him." Ryan stared at her, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "So what do we do now?" Emily's eyes hardened. "We find Voss, and we stop him." The battle had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever. But Emily was ready. The ghost wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for justice. The early morning sunlight barely pierced through the heavy mist that shrouded the Wyoming foothills. Inside their makeshift safe house, Emily Carson and Ryan Briggs pored over the intelligence retrieved from the depot raid. The air between them was tense but purposeful, charged with the urgency of their mission. Emily tapped the screen of her laptop, her expression grim. "This list confirms it. Voss isn't just smuggling weapons and tech. He's orchestrating assassinations, blackmailing officials, and silencing whistleblowers. This isn't an arms operation. It's an empire built on fear." Ryan leaned forward, his brows furrowed as he scanned the screen. "These names, some of these people are high-level. Senators, corporate executives, even military brass." "Exactly," Emily said. "And if we don't stop him, Voss will consolidate his power and eliminate anyone who gets in his way." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, his frustration evident. "We've been 2 steps ahead so far, but Voss has resources we can't match. What's our next move?" Emily's eyes flicked to her phone, where a message from Marcus Lane awaited. "We get help." That afternoon, Emily and Ryan traveled to a secluded cabin deep in the forest. Marcus Lane, a former intelligence analyst turned whistleblower, was waiting for them. He stood on the porch, his wiry frame tense with anticipation. "Sarah," he greeted, using her old name. "Or should I say Emily now?" Emily smirked faintly. "Sarah works fine for now." Marcus's gaze shifted to Ryan. "You must be Briggs. Heard a lot about you. Glad to see you're on the right side of this mess." Ryan shrugged. "Guess I finally figured out who the real enemy is." Inside the cabin, Marcus spread out a series of maps and files across the table. "I've been digging into Voss's network since you sent me that intel. It's worse than I thought. He's not just working with corrupt officials, he's buying them outright. And the broker is just the middleman." Emily stiffened. "Then who's the real power behind this?" Marcus pointed to a grainy photograph of a man in a suit boarding a private jet. "Victor Sandhurst, international financier. Officially, he's a philanthropist funding infrastructure projects in developing countries. Unofficially, he's the one funding Voss's empire. Sandhurst keeps his hands clean by using people like Voss to do the dirty work." Ryan exhaled sharply. "So we've been targeting the wrong man this whole time?" "Not exactly," Marcus said. "Voss is still critical to the operation. Without him, Sandhurst's network collapses. But taking Voss down won't be enough. We need to expose the entire system." Emily nodded slowly. "Which means we'll need proof, irrefutable evidence that links Sandhurst to the assassinations, smuggling, and corruption." Marcus hesitated. "There's a problem. Sandhurst's private servers are where the real dirt is, but they're nearly impossible to access. He keeps them in a high-security facility in Chicago. Even the best hackers can't crack it remotely." Ryan frowned. "So what? We break in?" Marcus gave a reluctant nod. "If you want to bring him down, that's exactly what you'll have to do." The next 2 days were spent preparing for the mission. Emily, Ryan, and Marcus worked tirelessly, crafting a plan to infiltrate Sandhurst's facility. It was located in the heart of Chicago, disguised as a financial institution. Sandhurst's security is top tier, Marcus explained. Armed guards, biometric locks, and surveillance that never sleeps. The servers are housed in a vault on the lower level, accessible only with a keycard and a retinal scan. Ryan crossed his arms. And how exactly do we get those? Marcus smiled faintly. I've already handled that. Sandhurst, head of security, has a favorite bar near the loop. A little persuasion, and I've got his retinal data and an extra keycard. Emily raised an eyebrow. Persuasion? Let's just say a few drinks and a well-placed distraction go a long way, Marcus replied with a shrug. The night of the mission arrived, and Emily found herself standing on the rooftop of a neighboring building, staring down at the target. The city's lights sparkled below, a stark contrast to the grim reality of their task. Ryan's voice crackled over the comms. I'm in position. Marcus? Ready when you are, Marcus replied from his van parked a few blocks away, his laptop glowing faintly in the dark. Emily took a deep breath. Let's move. Ryan entered the building first, disguised as a courier delivering a package. The fake ID Marcus had prepared allowed him to bypass the first round of security without issue. Package for Mr. Hartley, he said, referencing the alias Marcus had discovered for one of Sandhurst's associates. The guard at the front desk waved him through. Ryan kept his pace steady, his nerves under control as he headed for the service elevator. Meanwhile, Emily entered through a maintenance entrance, disabling a camera with a quick swipe of her EMP device. Moving swiftly and silently, she reached the stairwell leading to the lower level. Ryan, I'm in, she whispered. Copy that, Ryan replied. Inside the server room, Emily worked quickly, using the stolen keycard and a small device Marcus had provided to spoof the retinal scanner. Vault open, Marcus reported. You've got 3 minutes before the system flags the breach. Emily moved to the main terminal, inserting a flash drive. As the files began to transfer, she scanned the screen, her stomach tightening. The data revealed connections between Sandhurst and dozens of high-profile figures. Senators, CEOs, even law enforcement officials. Marcus, you're not going to believe this, she said. Sandhurst has been bribing intelligence agencies to cover up his operations. This goes deeper than anything we've seen. Marcus's voice was calm but urgent. Copy the files and get out. You're out of time. As Emily finished the transfer, alarms blared throughout the building. She cursed under her breath. Security's been alerted, Ryan said. I'll create a diversion. Emily sprinted for the stairwell, her heart pounding. Above her, Ryan set off a small smoke bomb in the service elevator, sending guards scrambling. Emily, you've got a clean exit, Marcus said. Go now. Outside, the three of them regrouped in Marcus's van, the tension palpable as they sped away. We got what we needed, Marcus said, his eyes scanning the files on his laptop. This is enough to bring down Sandhurst and Voss. Emily leaned back, her pulse still racing. Not yet. We need to make it public, ensure it can't be buried. Ryan nodded, his expression resolute. Then we finish this. For good. As the van disappeared into the Chicago night, Carter Voss stared at a live feed of the breached facility from his penthouse. His jaw clenched as he realized the implications. Find them, he ordered his security chief, and end this. The game was escalating, and the stakes had never been higher. The following morning, in a nondescript motel room on the outskirts of Chicago, Emily Carson, Ryan Briggs, and Marcus Lane gathered to review the damning evidence they had retrieved from Sandhurst's facility. The weight of what they had uncovered bore heavily on all of them. Bribery, blackmail, assassination. This is bigger than we thought, Marcus said, scrolling through the files on his laptop. His face was pale, and his fingers tapped anxiously on the desk. Ryan leaned over, reading one of the highlighted reports. These payouts, some of them are to foreign operatives. Sandhurst isn't just manipulating U.S. systems. He's selling classified intel to other countries. Emily sat back in her chair, her arms crossed. This isn't just about money or power. It's a global network designed to destabilize governments and profit off the chaos. Marcus nodded grimly. If this goes public, it'll expose half the people in Washington, not to mention intelligence agencies around the world. That's the plan, Emily said. But we need to be smart about it. If we drop this without a strategy, Sandhurst and Voss will bury it before anyone even knows it exists. Ryan frowned. So what's the move? We can't exactly walk into a newsroom and hand them a flash drive. No, Emily said, her voice steady. But we can hit them where it hurts. Public trust. We release it in waves, targeting the most visible figures first. Once the media gets a hold of it, the momentum will be unstoppable. Marcus looked uncertain. You're talking about a massive, coordinated leak. Do you know how dangerous that is? Emily met his gaze, her expression unwavering. We're already in the crosshairs. We either finish this, or we die trying. Over the next 2 days, the trio worked tirelessly to prepare the leak. Marcus tapped into his network of whistleblowers and journalists, vetting each one carefully to ensure they could be trusted. Ryan used his knowledge of the Steel Reapers operation to identify key players within the organization who might flip if pressured. He reached out to a few trusted contacts, offering immunity in exchange for their cooperation. Emily coordinated the overall strategy, ensuring that every piece of evidence was accounted for and ready for release. We start with the biggest targets, she said during one of their strategy meetings. High-profile names, undeniable proof. Once the media picks it up, it'll snowball. And Voss? Ryan asked. Emily's eyes hardened. Voss is the endgame. Once the network collapses, he'll have nowhere to hide. The first wave of the leak went live on a Thursday morning. Major news outlets began reporting on a trove of documents that implicated high-ranking officials in bribery and corruption. By noon, social media was flooded with hashtags calling for resignations and investigations. In Washington, political leaders scrambled to contain the fallout. Statements of denial and outrage flooded the airwaves, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. By evening, several senators and CEOs had resigned, their careers ruined by the revelations. We hit them hard, Marcus said as he monitored the news from their safe house. But they're already fighting back. Ryan glanced at Emily. What do you mean? Marcus pointed to his screen. I've been tracking chatter from Sandhurst's team. They're running counterintelligence ops, disinformation campaigns, bots flooding social media with fake narratives. They're trying to discredit the leak? Emily nodded. Expected. But that's why we planned for a second wave. The next wave of leaks targeted Sandhurst's financial dealings. Bank records, wire transfers, and offshore accounts linked him directly to Voss's arms trafficking network. This time, the media frenzy was even more intense. News anchors openly questioned how such a vast operation had gone undetected for so long. Investigative reporters dug into the connections, uncovering even more scandals. But the backlash was swift and brutal. The team's safe house was compromised that night. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside, and heavily armed men began circling the property. Move, Emily barked, grabbing her pistol. Marcus scrambled to pack up his equipment while Ryan covered the rear exit. The first gunshots shattered the motel's front windows, sending glass spraying across the room. Emily returned fire, her movements precise and controlled. We need to split up, she said. Marcus, take the files and get to the secondary location. Ryan and I will cover you. Marcus hesitated but nodded. He grabbed the laptop and a hard drive before slipping out the back door. Ryan fired a few well-placed shots, forcing the attackers to take cover. This is insane, he shouted. This is Voss. Emily replied. He's desperate, which means we're winning. The two of them fought their way out of the motel, disappearing into the night as sirens wailed in the distance. By dawn, they had regrouped at an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. Marcus was already there, typing furiously on his laptop. We've got a problem, he said as they entered. No kidding, Ryan muttered, rubbing his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. Marcus turned his screen toward them. Sandhurst just issued a public statement. He's denying everything and calling us domestic terrorists. Emily's jaw tightened. He's trying to flip the narrative. It's worse than that, Marcus continued. He's using his connections to push for an emergency executive order, something about enhanced security measures to counter cyberterrorism. If he gets it, he'll have the authority to shut down the leak and track us in real time. Emily paced the room, her mind racing. Then we have to stop him before that happens. What's our next move? Marcus hesitated. The final wave. We release everything we have, Voss's connections, Sandhurst's financial records, the assassination orders, all of it. Ryan frowned. Won't that make us even bigger targets? Emily stopped pacing and looked at him. We're already targets. If we don't release it now, everything we've done will be for nothing. Ryan nodded reluctantly. Then let's finish this. The final wave of leaks hit the internet the next morning, and the effect was immediate. News outlets broke into live programming to report on the revelations. The hashtag #ExposeVoss trended worldwide, and protests erupted outside government buildings. Sandhurst's reputation was destroyed, and his empire began to crumble. But Emily knew they weren't safe yet. Voss was still out there, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. This isn't over, she told Marcus and Ryan. Voss is going to come for us. We need to be ready. As the three of them prepared for the final confrontation, Emily felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The ghost was ready to finish what she had started. The sun dipped below the Chicago skyline as Emily Carson prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous operation of her life. In the shadows of an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, she, Ryan Briggs, and Marcus Lane finalized their plan to take down Carter Voss. The final wave of leaks had shattered Voss's network and exposed Sandhurst as the mastermind behind a global conspiracy. But Voss wasn't running. He was consolidating what remained of his resources for a last stand. He's holed up in a private estate outside the city, Marcus said, pointing to a satellite image on his laptop. It's a fortress, security teams, surveillance systems, and enough firepower to start a war. Ryan frowned as he studied the layout. And you're saying we're just going to stroll in there? Emily's eyes were hard as steel. No, we're going to dismantle him piece by piece. This ends tonight. The estate, a sprawling compound surrounded by high walls and dense forest, was Voss's sanctuary. Inside, he paced the grand hall, his mind racing. The leaks had destroyed his credibility and forced many of his allies to abandon him. But not all of them. In a dimly lit study, Voss met with a small group of loyal mercenaries. We hold this position, he said, his voice cold and commanding. The files they leaked can't be undone, but if we eliminate them, we can still salvage parts of the operation. One of the mercenaries, a scarred man with a sniper rifle slung over his shoulder, nodded. We've reinforced all entry points. If they come, they won't leave alive. Voss smirked, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. Outside the compound, Emily crouched behind a tree, her gaze fixed on the perimeter through binoculars. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece. Security grid's active. Thermal cameras are sweeping every 30 seconds. You've got a small window to slip through. Ryan, lying prone beside her with his rifle ready, whispered, Are we sure this is worth it? Sandhurst's already toast. Voss is just a middleman. Emily lowered the binoculars and looked at him. Voss isn't just a middleman. He's the one who turned this network into a global machine. Without him, Sandhurst never could have pulled this off. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. Then let's end it. The plan began with precision. Marcus hacked into the compound's surveillance system, looping the camera feeds to create blind spots. You're clear to move, he said. Emily and Ryan advanced through the underbrush, slipping past the outer defenses. The first obstacle was a pair of guards stationed near the main gate. Emily motioned to Ryan, and he took aim, his silenced rifle dispatching both guards with clean, efficient shots. 2 down, Ryan muttered. Emily pressed forward, her movements silent and deliberate. They reached a side entrance, where Marcus's tampered keycard granted them access. Inside the estate, the halls were dimly lit, and the tension was palpable. Emily and Ryan moved through the labyrinth of corridors, avoiding patrols and disabling security nodes as they went. At a security room near the center of the compound, Marcus's voice came through again. This is your first checkpoint. If you take out their comms hub, they'll lose coordination. Emily nodded to Ryan. Cover me. As Ryan took up a defensive position, Emily slipped into the security room, her silenced pistol at the ready. The 2 guards inside barely had time to react before she neutralized them. She moved quickly, placing a small device on the console. Marcus, the scrambler's in place. They're blind. Copy that, Marcus replied. You've got about 10 minutes before they realize what's happening. As they moved deeper into the estate, the sound of boots echoed in the distance. "They're mobilizing," Ryan whispered. Emily's jaw tightened. "Then we pick up the pace." They reached a large, ornate study, the heart of the compound. Inside, Carter Voss sat at a massive desk, a pistol resting casually beside his hand. He looked up as they entered, his lips curling into a smirk. "So, the infamous ghost finally shows herself." Emily stepped forward, her pistol trained on him. "It's over, Voss. Your network is gone. Your allies are turning on you. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live long enough to stand trial." Voss chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You really think this ends with me? I'm just a cog in a much larger machine. You might have taken down Sandhurst, but there will always be others." Ryan stepped beside Emily, his rifle aimed at Voss. "Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." Before Voss could respond, the study doors burst open, and a group of mercenaries stormed in, weapons raised. "Get down," Emily shouted, diving behind a bookshelf as bullets tore through the air. The next few minutes were chaos. Emily and Ryan fought with lethal precision, using the room's furniture for cover. Voss retreated through a hidden door, shouting orders to his men. Emily signaled to Marcus. "We're pinned down. Can you shut off the lights?" "Working on it," Marcus replied. A moment later, the room plunged into darkness. Emily activated her night vision goggles, moving through the shadows like a phantom. One by one, the mercenaries fell, their advantage lost. With the guards neutralized, Emily and Ryan pursued Voss through the hidden passage. It led to a panic room, where Voss was frantically typing on a secure terminal. "Stop," Emily ordered, her voice echoing in the narrow space. Voss froze, his hands raised. "You don't understand. If I go down, the entire system collapses. Do you have any idea what kind of power you're meddling with?" Emily's expression was cold and unyielding. "That's the point." Before Voss could respond, Ryan disabled the terminal with a single shot, sparks flying as the screen went dark. Outside, sirens wailed as law enforcement closed in on the estate. Marcus had tipped off the FBI, ensuring that Voss couldn't escape. "You're done," Emily said, her voice low and firm. "It's over." Voss sneered, his bravado fading. "You think you've won? There will always be others." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Then we'll find them too." As federal agents stormed the compound, Emily, Ryan, and Marcus slipped away, disappearing into the night. The next morning, the headlines were dominated by the takedown of Carter Voss and the collapse of his empire. Public trust was shaken, but justice had been served. Back at the ranch, Emily stood on the porch, watching the sunrise. Marcus and Ryan joined her, their expressions reflecting a mix of relief and exhaustion. "What now?" Ryan asked. Emily's eyes remained on the horizon. "Now, we watch, and we wait, because there will always be shadows. But there will always be people like us to bring them into the light." The ghost's mission was complete, but the hunt would continue, ensuring that justice prevailed in the face of darkness.